Hello, everyone. Good afternoon and welcome to All Aboard Governance in the Age of DEI. I am Sharnita Johnson, and I am the Vice President of Strategy, Impact, and Communications with the Victoria Foundation in Newark, New Jersey. I am zooming in from Orange, New Jersey, on the land of the Lenni Lenape people, and we're experiencing a nor'easter. So there's about 50 feet of snow outside my window, and I'm so excited that we're having this conversation with these amazing people on your screen. You have their bios, but I'm going to let them do their own introduction. So I'm going to start with Tracey. Tracey, can you give us a snapshot of who you are and what you want us to know about you before we start this conversation?
Oh, thank you so much. And good afternoon, everyone. And I'm thrilled to be here. I think this is my third Sphinx conference, so thrilled to be with everyone. And I'm coming from Vermont. I left Cambridge to avoid the storm, and now I'm in -1 degrees up in Vermont. So I don't know which one's better there. But again, my name is Tracey Robertson Carter. The T stands for Tracey. And I'm a board member, a very proud board member of New World Symphony and the Chicago Sinfonietta. But also board co-chair of a couple of other environmental organizations, as well as an advocate for our youth, particularly our Black and Brown youth who are currently incarcerated. And I mentor kids in that area. I'm also a first-year Harvard Divinity School student. So I'm really much looking forward to this conversation because my journey to Harvard Divinity School is actually around some of the intersections I found between classical arts and social justice that I never imagined before joining this board and joining the New World Symphony board. So looking forward to a really lively and impactful conversation with my other colleagues here.
Thank you so much, Tracey. I'm gonna shift over to Terry. Terry, can you give us an introduction and tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. Well, the first thing I would say, this is the only thing between me and a snowblower this afternoon. So I welcome the opportunity to be here today. My name is Terry Woodard. I am the current chair of the Sphinx organization. Proud chair of the Sphinx organization, the host, obviously, of this great conference. And my day job, I'm a vice chair in the private bank at JPMorgan Chase. And I currently live in South Orange, New Jersey. And my daughter actually is at the B School at Harvard, so maybe you guys will bump into each other at some point in time. And I also chair a board here in New Jersey, Jazz House Kids. So I'm on 2 musical boards. I don't sing, I don't play an instrument, but somehow or another, I've gotten myself into the music industry. So happy to be here today with this esteemed panel. So thank you.
Awesome, Terry. Thank you. And I will finish out our panelist intros with Joseph.
Hi, Sharnita. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for having me. I've been involved with Sphinx since its founding back with the first competition back in 1998. So I had a long journey with Sphinx. I'm currently assistant principal double bass of the Philadelphia Orchestra. I'm the, now the founder and vision advisor for Project 440, formerly the executive director. We've been around for about 15 years, starting off as a small nonprofit in Savannah, Georgia, and now relocating here to Philadelphia and now serving communities around the country. I am the music director. I wear a lot of hats. Music director of the All-City Orchestra here in Philadelphia, of the School District of Philadelphia. And I also am the director of the Young Artist Orchestra program at the Boston University Tanglewood Institute. So I've got a Massachusetts connection too.
Wow, this is a power panel, I'm just saying. So just to insert myself a little bit in here, because I have been involved with the Sphinx organization pretty much since its inception as well. I'm a native Detroiter and began funding Sphinx organization when I was a program person with the Michigan Council for Arts and Cultural Affairs, and subsequently went on to fund them in other iterations. So I've been in philanthropy for a while, and so that's why this conversation is so important to me because I've been involved in the nonprofit sector for pretty much my entire career. And I think that the 501c3 structure is not the perfect container in which to do this work. And I find that it's particularly challenging, I think, for BIPOC-led and serving organizations in many, many ways. So I think we'll talk about that a little bit, but really the whole question around governance has been something that I've sort of grappled with my entire career, particularly trying to work with startup organizations. I'm a founding board member of several organizations in Michigan, Tapology in Flint, and Heritage Works in Detroit, and really have experienced sort of firsthand, as well as working in the nonprofit sector, how boards sort of work and iterate. And this is just a really interesting topic for me. So we're going to hunker down. I don't know if it's snowing where you are, but we're going to hunker down like we're around the kitchen table and just have this for real conversation, because I think the topic that we want to talk about is, you know, boards have really limited, actually, legal requirements. They are, the constraints that we put around boards oftentimes are the things that we as leaders, we as board members, et cetera, sort of put on top of what's actually legally required, which is basically that you have a board meeting, that you have submit some financials, that you submit some tax information, and everything else is kind of almost a construct that we create. And we have amazing, amazing people who are giving their time and talent and treasure and money to organizations to support the mission. But we put a lot of boxes around that work. So, and I think right now, in addition to sort of putting aside that the form and the function of serving on boards, we've had this explosion over the last couple of years, really, I think, sparked obviously by George Floyd's murder and the protests over the summer. Boards are talking about diversity, equity, and inclusion in a different way now. And, you know, I have sort of a long reflection period of working on boards, working in the nonprofit, and it's always been a question. You know, we've been, first we were talking about diversity, and now we're talking about diversity, equity, and inclusion, which is very, very different. So I'm just wondering, and anyone, we can start with anyone, are you finding sort of in the last few years that your experiences as a board member have changed, or has the conversation changed about diversity, equity, and inclusion in those spaces?
Well, I'll leave this one to Tracey and Joseph, since that's our primary work.
Well, I'll start, and Joseph, please chime in here. So what I find interesting, and Sharnita, I hope it's to say that this particular panel, I can tell just from the opening bios, and I do know a bit about Terry and Joseph and yourself, is that we are definitely the folks that we are outside of the box in everything we do every day, unapologetically in what we do, I can tell. So in terms of this particular panel and these particular people you're speaking with, we're the ones that are not, you know, I wouldn't be part of New World, and I put board member in my title on this, for this panel, is because that is where I do understand that I'm at a place in my life where I can actually impact change. So in order to, you know, I'm going to say, to respond to what you're sharing, I think that Mr. Floyd's murder has definitely, it's changed the conversation. It hasn't changed, I know you're not particular, but it hasn't changed myself. And I'm sorry to talk on behalf, I'm not sorry to talk on behalf of Terry and Joseph, but it hasn't changed what we've been doing probably our entire lives, and yourself. It's just that the rooms have changed, and now we're in those rooms, and we're able to be more impactful in those rooms because other people have language. And that's where I'll just start with that comment, because you mentioned about the boxes and what's changed, but it's definitely changed. But I'm just glad to be in the room at this time to be part of that change.
Great.
Yeah.
Joseph, Terry, did you want to comment?
Sure. Yeah. I would say, I mean, since the death of George Floyd, there has been lots of talk, of course. It's almost like the obvious thing for everyone to be doing. And dare I say, and I hate saying it in this way, but dare I say the sexy thing to be doing, to be talking about. And I say it in that way, not to trivialize the importance of the conversation, but sometimes I feel like the efficacy of those conversations, or what happens after the fact. So there are many conversations going on, and well warranted. And to Tracey's point, there have been many of us talking about this work for years. What I want to see is the action, are the steps. What I want to see is the change. Well, we talk about systemic change. I want to see the change. So I think the conversations are wonderful. It's great that voices are being heard and that spotlights are being shown on individuals and communities and voices that have for too long been underrepresented, particularly in the classical music space. Now the next step, y'all, and this is the biggest one, because talk is easy, is the action. And that's what I want to see from all these institutions that are having these conversations, important conversations. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah, I would just say I agree with Joseph. I think for the longest time it was all around awareness. And we were aware. we're fully aware.
Yes.
But where is the action? What are we going to do about this now that we are aware? And I would just also say, for the longest time, we didn't talk about it either. I mean, we were aware, but we were never engaged in conversation.
Yes.
And so to me, I was always baffled as to how do you solve a problem that you don't talk about? And the other part of it was, how do you solve a problem if you don't really understand the issues? So, we weren't in the room to have those conversations. People were in the rooms that looked like each other, trying to solve problems for people that don't look like them. And to me, how does that happen? That doesn't happen very effectively. So I do think that, yes, it's about the conversation, and now it's about the action in order to make, to move this forward, because I think we've toiled in awareness for way too long.
Great point. And I'll just talk about, so I will let folks know that if you have a question, please drop it in the Q&A section, which is in the backstage part of the the ballroom tab. So we have a couple questions already. We're going to try to iterate in this conversation. So we have some questions that I've prepared, but I may drop these in at any moment. But I do want to talk about what you're saying, Terry and Joseph, and what you said, Tracey, around we've had a lot of conversations, we've had a lot of awareness, and now where is the action? And I think, and I can speak particularly on the philanthropy side, and I'm really proud to say that the Victoria Foundation actually has totally shifted their focus, and they took a break for 18 months to do some internal planning and learning with the board and staff. And now our grant making is shifting toward disrupting those systems that keep Black and brown people in poverty. And prior to that, when I was with the Dodge Foundation in New Jersey, we also went through a similar process where when I joined the foundation in 2015, the landscape of the grantees wasn't as reflective of the diversity in New Jersey. And we had a conversation about that, which started, a 4-year sort of journey for the foundation to really start to examine what kind of impact we could have and to learn about DEI, anti-racist, all of those things. So we spent a fair amount of time educating ourselves, and that foundation now has shifted its grant making to disrupt the root causes of structural racism. So, and there are lots of foundations that have in the last few years, Joseph, as you kind of alluded to, have kind of gotten on this bandwagon. I'm hoping that this is a door I suspect it's a window, so that we can keep these conversations going and that we can continue to actually do the action, put the money into the communities, into the hands of BIPOC leaders, into these communities, and have those hard conversations. So that kind of leads me into—
I just, on your point though, I think that it's interesting that, you know, places like Dodge have rethought sort of their strategies. But sometimes that doesn't necessarily benefit us, because when they don't necessarily see the social benefit of what you're trying to do, they move dollars away. And I think that that now puts the onus on institutions like ours to be very clear about what we view as our social impact within the framework of DE&I. So I just say that because I've experienced a little bit of that recently, where dollars have moved away because they don't necessarily see the impact that the organization is having from a social impact perspective.
Absolutely. So we have actually a really good question that came in through the chat, which is how can we move beyond check the DEI boxes because the grant makers require it, or the view of the board is that we need one of these or one of these or one of these.
I'll hop in here because I think given this is about board governance, it comes down to board governance. And what I mean by that is I think a lot of the biggest issue I see is just a lack of accountability across the board, if you will. If someone is setting up, so my organization is very small in comparison to a lot of your organizations, but the structures are very much the same. Having gone through, let's say, a strategic planning process, we talked about things like KPIs or key performance indicators, and what are our benchmarks that are going to show that these things that we are saying that we want to do are actually happening? And then how do we hold ourselves accountable to those things? So one, I would say the benchmarks need to be set up so it's not performative, so it's not just a one-off. But if you say we're going to serve or have this many concerts or this many composers of color or this, then set those benchmarks, have it agreed upon within the institution, and then make sure the institution's held accountable. I think that's where the ball is dropped the most, because there's, again, a lot of talk about things and a lot of great aspirations and good feelings. But when it comes down to when it comes down to getting things done, the accountability isn't there. Things come up, other institutional problems arise, and then it gets put on the back burner, and those KPIs are never met. And then it's kicked on to the next strategic plan, which is maybe why 30, 40 years later, we're still talking about this in the classical music space, because those accountability measures have not been observed or placed in a way that people are feeling they're being held accountable.
Yeah, I think that goes to consistency. I think that boards have to do assessments of themselves, right? I mean, we have to assess, to your point, are we meeting our, these KPIs? And if we're not, why not? And what do we need to do to ensure that this doesn't continue? Because the other issue is consistency around the mission. And, boards tend to be somewhat lax, and I think you'll get into sort of the board structure. Depending on what the makeup of the board is, that determines how effective that board is as well. And so, we have to hold ourselves accountable to meeting the KPIs, and we have to hold ourselves accountable to sort of being very strategic about the individuals that we put on our boards. Because to the point that was made earlier, some people just want to sit in a seat because they think it's great to say they sit on a board. But if you're only there to sit in a seat, increase your CV, then, there are other ways to do that. Don't take up a seat of someone who can actually have an impact to the organization.
Great point. We have actually a question in the chat that is, I think, really apropos to what we're talking about. So it's one thing to bring new folks onto the board. It's another to set them up for success. How have boards that you've been on succeeded or failed to onboard new folks in a meaningful way?
Well, I would just say part of it is the onboarding process, right? I mean, you have to onboard people, let them know what is expected of them as a board member. And again, you know, hold people accountable to what you've outlined, because I think what happens is people get on boards, and we all bring different talents to the board. Let's just be honest. We all bring different talents to the board. And within the board, you probably have multiple boards within one board. I mean, you have people who are there because they're great fundraisers, and you have people there because they bring a particular skill to the table. But you have to have a good mixture of those types of people in order to have an effective board, right? So I think we just have to be a lot more diligent about the onboarding process and the vetting process to bring people on board. It's great to have diversity, but not at the expense of the effectiveness of the board.
Sharnita, I'm gonna apologize because the ice storm has followed me and Wi-Fi is gonna come in and out. So I'm gonna try to speak quickly and stay online here. So I want to speak to something particularly around classical boards, because if there's one thing, classical music boards, being on symphony boards, etc., because it's also, there's an intimidation if you haven't been in that world before. So for me particularly, I know that I'm actually reaching out on behalf of New World Symphony and Chicago Sinfonietta, which I'm very proud to be a board member of, is that I was vetted onto New World Symphony by being invited to something that would appeal to me, which would be a diversity conference. This was done in 2016. Maybe some of you were on it. I think I may have met a number of people from Sphinx who were part of that. I wasn't on the board yet, but I started to understand, as they would say, the DNA of the organization. And there's something that the former board chair and current board chair always speak about, is that it's in a classical music board specifically, it's something that's new to for people of color to be on boards like that. It's something that the onboarding process should be something where you are addressing and being very clear of what we're not expecting just of a board member of color like myself, but what we're expecting of a board member like Terry shared, but also the specific issues that are happening within the classical music area, and specifically around people like us not being or looking classical. We're not considered classical. The classical canon has to be challenged, and I won't dip my toe too far over there, but I'm there in support of, that's why I'm on a board, right? That's why I find a classical board so unique in that it crosses these worlds of exactly, even though it's classical, it's crossing these worlds of exactly where we are now in our society, of reframing everything that was formerly known to be true. So to answer specifically on the onboarding process, I think it's also really, really important to be very specific in that vetting process of why someone wants to be on the board, speak to what they are, what they could bring to the board. And I think that makes for me, that made for a very successful, I've been on this board now, I think I'm going into year 4 of New World Symphony, and my year 1 in Chicago Sinfonietta.
And I was going to say, for you small nonprofits out there, I feel like I'm speaking for the small nonprofit sector and onboarding, because this is a big deal. I mean, we talked about this a lot with my own organization. But with, if you're in a small nonprofit, one of the things that we've done for onboarding is, because to one of our, we've been working with a great consultant in the last few years. And one of the things she says is, you can be a wonderful cheerleader for the organization and still not be on the board. So, because to your point, there are a lot of people who have a lot of energy, but no time. And which case they're sitting on a board seat that of someone who does have the time to serve the organization the way that needs to be served, can be acting actively in that position. So that's one. But for us, we actually have a process of, you want to learn about the organization? Sure. Why don't you serve on a committee first? because a committee is almost like dating. That's the way I see a committee. You have board committees. You can actually, we have folks who are not on our board of directors who serve on our committees. However, if we're looking at someone who might be a candidate for being on our board, they can serve on one of these committees, and both entities get to understand, okay, what kind of relationship is this? Is this the best fit? What's required? You can learn a bit about the organization. And so when the big ask comes, if you want to serve on a board, that person knows exactly what is expected of them, and hopefully be an effective leader and board member within the organization.
Yes, COIs are hugely important, right? I mean, you want centers of influence. They don't have to be on your board. I mean, they just have to be there when you need them. And, and that's probably where they want to be, because they don't want to come to the board meetings, and they don't want to do all the other stuff, especially if it's a working board. So I think COIs are hugely important. I think we sometimes try to force the issue of being on the board because we think that brings greater connectivity. And actually what it does, I think, ultimately is it probably ruins a really good relationship that you could have with someone who could be very impactful to your organization.
I think that these are really good points and when we really think, board members many times don't even have a deep knowledge of the subject matter of the boards often. They're not on the ground every day sort of doing this work. And so that sort of board training, onboarding, and access to staff and even access to the actual work on the ground is so important, but I find that it's missing often, particularly in nonprofit sector, because again, I think this 501c3 structure is really a challenge, because you still need board members that can either give resources, financial or other, and or get them. There's limited public support, unlike other places on the planet. So it really sets up the 501c3 structure. It sets up these organizations to have to sort of identify board members that have resources often, or that are willing to fundraise. And so it's oftentimes a challenge. And as I said, I think particularly for BIPOC-led and serving organizations, it's a particular challenge. But I did want to talk about that a little bit in terms of some of us have had board experiences, and this is certainly mine, where we've sort of been a diversity candidate, and maybe we knew that we were the diversity board member, or maybe we didn't. So we get on the boards, and they want us to lead the DE&I committee, and I have been asked to serve on a board. I looked at the board, I looked on the website, and there was one Black woman who was rotating off. So I guess I was going to be the Black woman rotating on. And I said, no, I'm interested in this organization. I believe in what you do, but you have to bring me on in a class of maybe 3 people of color, because I can't, you can't just rotate that one slot. So I'm just really kind of curious. And I think too, some of us have gone on to boards and we wanted to go on to be the disruptor to the board, and to have these conversations and shift the organizations. So I'm just really kind of curious if folks have a point of view about that or have experienced that.
Not in a not-for-profit space. In other spaces, for sure, but definitely not in a not. I mean, the boards I'm on, there's good diversity, there's great diversity. But I hear you. I do know, there are situations where, yes, there's a rotating seat for the one minority who sits on the board, and then they get tasked with being spokesperson for all minorities, for God's sake, which is ridiculous. So yeah, I agree. I think that's, but I think again, if you get in, I think it's now, you got to be the loud voice. You got to be that person who is a disruptor, who is going to say, well, we need to bring another Black person, or we need to bring another minority on the board, because I can't be the only one. I mean, if they let you in, what's the worst thing that could happen? They could ask you to leave. I mean, it's right. So I don't know. That's just I look at it in that very simplistic way, I think.
I agree. I'll jump in. I mean, I just wanted to agree with Terry, because most of those, I guess it's called Disruptor. My parents would say the T stands for tenacious. So it's something that if you're going to invite me to be part of a board, I definitely am doing my vetting as well to see the understanding the environment I'm going into. We are natural disruptors because of the spaces we sit in. And I'm going to go back to specifically, since I'm at a class, a Sphinx conference, everybody who's watching, everyone who's on this panel, we are natural disruptors because we're Black and brown people in spaces that we typically in the classical world were not part of or recognized in the past. So in terms of being on a board, there's nothing I personally get out of being the only person of color in the room at all. I bring an army with me when I can, whether it be in the boardroom or surrounding me. And I'm taking that, it takes an army from a dear friend and the executive director of the Chicago Sinfonietta, Blake Anthony Johnson, who shared with me when I joined the board that it took an army for him to get to that level of where he was in his career, and now being the youngest and maybe a handful of Black executive directors in the country of a symphony. But to answer you, Sharnita, it just feels like I wouldn't join something. I'm not joining something to, then I would just create my own. I want to say, if I'm seeing something that I have to be the only disruptor in the room and they've never had this before, and you're just filling a void in 2022, I challenge that organization on more levels than just joining the board. I challenge them on really, as you said, I think you said with Victoria Foundation or other foundations you worked on, you've gone back and done the work. Do the work, and I'm ready to hold hands and jump in with you. But no, I'm not interested in joining and being the only one or being vetted as the only one.
Thank you. So we have a lot of questions sort of about really operationalizing DEI, and I want to get to some of them, but I really want to kind of circle back to sort of what Joseph kind of put in the conversation, and it's a question that came up. And it's accountability is so important. And I was wondering if you could talk about what that might look like in practice. So I don't think that this question is specifically around DEI, but just accountability as a board member, because we do want to make sure that we kind of really talk really directly about the governance issue. So I, definitely like to hear the panelists' perspective on what accountability looks like in practice, because as we know, serving on a board, even though it's a legal structure, is also sort of a social construct, and people join boards for community. People, as Terry mentioned, join boards for prestige, where, I'm pretty polite on, the boards that I sit on. I think we all are, until we're not. So can you talk about, can everybody kind of talk about what accountability looks like?
Well, I just want to say the buck stops with the board. It does. Yeah. I mean, this is something when I started a nonprofit and I got my first book from Barnes & Noble, Nonprofit for Dummies. I still have it as a reminder of where I started. But I was learning all kinds of things I didn't realize, and this is for those with the small nonprofits out there or those who are starting organizations themselves. I didn't realize, wait, I'm the founder. I'm the vision for this organization. And wait, the board can fire me? Absolutely. So when you talk about the board being a social whatever, it does not negate the responsibility of actually running the organization. So when it comes to KPIs, and this is coming from someone who has very much a working board, when it comes to those KPIs and what we were talking about before, and you're looking for accountability, when you've created your strategic plan, how often do you revisit that plan? Do you have a committee that looks at that plan? And if you can set up these benchmarks, does the board talking about, we've met these benchmarks? And if it's not, then you're looking at the executive director and the staff saying, what do we need to do? And how can we help to make sure we meet these key performance indicators or these goals that we set for the organization so that we are moving forward? But I know the boards they can be fancy places, but the buck stops with them in the nonprofit sector for sure. And I don't like to I'm going to say take the foot off the gas when it comes to demanding that kind of leadership from the boards, particularly in the nonprofit sector.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think it's funny. Not-for-profits aren't different than for-profit organizations. I mean, let's be real. I mean, it's and so there comes a point in time, especially in founder organizations, where maybe the founder just is, he or she has sort of outrun their ability to run the organization. And that, and then that's when your board really has to be activated, because, to Joseph's point, the buck stops with the board, right? And the board has to be, has to man up, woman up, and do what is necessary, because your fiduciary responsibility is to ensure this is an ongoing organization. And so sometimes there are hard decisions that have to be made. And, that's when the board really does have to be activated and engaged and make hard decisions and be held accountable for the actions of the organization, especially if that organization is not optimized in the way that it should be. So, I would just say that, I think Joseph is right. I mean, the buck stops with us as fiduciaries of the organization. Don't sit in the seat if you're not willing to be accountable. Don't sit in the seat if you're not willing to make the hard decisions, and definitely don't sit in the seat and become the best friend of the person that you have to be governing.
Oh, interesting. I like it. So this is actually a good segue for Joseph and I. Tracey, I believe you founded a nonprofit too. So I'd like to hear from both of you, sort of, when you were in that sort of founder mode, as you were thinking about how you were going to build the board and what those relationships would look like, and what were the early days of founderdom like, and what did you learn about governance, and how did you learn? Like you dropped a book, Nonprofit for Dummies. What kind of research did you guys do? So I just think it would be really important for people to kind of hear what that looks like from when you're starting an organization and dealing with all of those structures and things that you have to put in place to make it viable.
Do you want to go first, Trey?
This is a tough. It's not a tough one. It's just that I come from I wonder if I should pull out my nonprofit for dummies, because I am in a space that everything's about process, action, process. Basically, trial and error, and I'm definitely never afraid to take that step. And sometimes even the fact that you have to regroup after failure is a tough word, but it's something that to constantly regroup. Because one thing that I love about the entrepreneurial space, but which happens with a nonprofit, a founding nonprofit like Joseph's, the things I've done, is that you're creating something from nothing, right? You're creating something from a vision of, because I know Joseph's work, it's a vision for something better. So you're creating something to elevate. In my case, it was, I had the great fortune of being able to work with youth that changed my world to today around why we need to, and why I'm using this term reframing. I'm learning religious literacy to actually bring back to the things that I'm doing every day, because if we reframe our foundation of what we know or what we thought to be true, I think it will help us with more conversations. But I'll get off that soapbox for now till I graduate. But for the nonprofit piece, I want to tell you that Sharnita, I wish I could give a straight line. So maybe Joseph, because he has the book, can do better. But mine really started with doing the work, and I call it Field of Dreams planning. That's how I'm still doing that with smaller nonprofits. New World's a very different situation. I hope we have looked at ourselves. We've challenged ourselves. Sphinx has challenged us being in this space. I do have to add, I'm also I think maybe in a unique position that I sit and I work and I want to be on these boards, but my husband's also a trustee of with a foundation called the Wege Foundation in Grand Rapids, Michigan. And I've learned a lot from the foundation and from the other organizations, the foundation, that have looked at their nonprofits, and maybe even though you're getting money, you're getting stuff, they're challenging themselves of how can we be doing this better? So I could just start with that. It did start with, for me, actually doing the work and creating a good organization, and then finding those that could help elevate, whether some would be the story. I come from a brand background, so story is very important, but also those who can make that connection to fundraising and the sort. But as an entrepreneur, I got to say, it's Field of Dreams planning. You got to start with the vision and you move from there. So I don't really have a direct thing to tell you about how to do that board development. But Joseph, I'm going to hand it off to you because maybe you can give some better advice there.
Well, I don't know. I think in the entrepreneurial space, which I feel like honestly a lot of, particularly those who start up nonprofits, you have to have an entrepreneurial spirit. And there was a motto at the from my alma mater, Kirsten Student Music: learn by doing. And there's a lot of learning by doing in this space because you just don't know. And I think what makes for any good entrepreneur is they just do. So I think at the early stages of a nonprofit with the founder, it's a lot of just, when, for example, my first board was honestly, I mean, it was me and two other founding members. It was the dad and his friends, basically to help us sign the paperwork. But it was a board just to make us a legal entity. We did all the work as the workers of the organization. But like with anything in life, you realize you can't do everything on your own. And if you want to grow, you need support. And like any good entrepreneur, you have to establish who is your network. Find out who is in your network, who can help you, and what skills do you lack. Don't just find people who agree with you, find people who disagree with you. Have lots of conversations with them because you'll learn a whole lot. And then you can start to have these thought partners who can, it's almost like forming the embryo of a thinking body, which could be your board. And one that provides the resources that are needed for you to continue to grow into maturity. And that's kind of the way Project 440 did. I mean, when we were in Savannah, it was very much the founder and founders who ran the organization. As we moved to Philadelphia and we expanded our network, and we wanted to work with more students, and we wanted to be in more communities, and we wanted to know we had to grow, and we needed the money to do it. Networking, finding the folks in the community who want to help, building out the board so that they realized it, and it was still very much a working board. And I think anyone who joins the Project 440 board realizes that. Very much a working board, but they all are contributing in a way that helps the organization grow until you get to that point where, I mean, I'm happy to say Project 40, I've left the executive director position now, and I'm in this new role, this founder role, and we have a new executive director, and the board helped go through this process, and we're raising money, and it starts to become its own organism. Now, for some people, this takes place very quickly. Other people, it takes place longer. For me, with the many hats that I wear, sometimes some things can take some time because this is not hasn't been my main job, but it's always been my passion. So, and I mean, that's just my life, is how do I use my work and my craft to help with others. But that's another conversation. But that can be the inspiration to find board members to help serve your organization in the way that you want to serve your community.
So let me ask everybody, and particularly you, Joseph, because you just said that you've shifted sort of from the leadership role into another sort of role in the organization. But oftentimes we see with founders, and I think, Terry, you mentioned as well, that, they've stayed too long, or they haven't made the succession plan, or they have a succession plan, but they, it goes on the shelf. And I think that there is often, there's a point of no return on these things sometimes, where And we've seen this often where founder-led organizations, the founder retires, they bring on someone, and the organization winds up going belly up. So just kind of would love to just hear your, everybody on the panel, your sort of experience with that or your opinions on that, because that's a really important piece around governance, kind of knowing when to transition that leadership, and the board having a really important role in that.
Can I just comment? I would say I was listening to Joseph and the passion that he has that comes out clearly every time he speaks. You have to be fanatical, right? I mean, it's I'm not an entrepreneur, but I can say I've been around enough of them, and I know that the one characteristic that is absolutely true of the successful ones are they're fanatics. And you know, they live, breathe, and eat what it is that they do, and they're consistent about it. And you could see that with my fellow panelists here. The other thing is, I do think that, as I said earlier, I mean, I think founders sometimes get to a point where the organization has outgrown them. And you know, when you're a founder and you are a fanatic, it's hard to see that. And it's hard to know when it's time to take a step back or take a different role within the organization, and allow for, you know, the growth to occur with individuals or individual who has the requisite skill set to take the organization to the next level. And, you know, not many people, you know, even in like sports, you just don't know when it's time to hang up your sneakers, right? I mean, you get to the point where you just still feel you can make the threes and you can't. And, you know, so, you know, that's a hard discussion. But I do think that that is another discussion that the board has to have, right? The board just sort of has to have that conversation that we need to bring in a COO, or we need to bring in a new executive director, and allow you to do what you do best, which is represent the organization, but in a different seat. Because no one is ever going to be able to talk about it with the level of passion that the founder will. But that founder needs to take that energy and utilize it in a different way to better, you know, to better suit the organization and allow the operation of the organization to be handled by other individuals. And that's a hard conversation. It's a hard thing to accept, especially if, you know, you created it and, you know, you've turned over, now you have to turn over your baby to somebody else, right? So that's been some of the things I've seen in my time.
Tracy, Joseph, you want to?
Joseph knows I'm looking at him, but I thought Terry, what Terry just shared is so perfect. I've experienced all of that in my life and all of that in my work. And yes, you do have to be a bit fanatical, but all the song that keeps going through my head is The Gambler. When to hold him, walk away and run. Right? So it just keeps going through my head. No, thank you. I just want to say the way that Terry put that was perfect, because you know, we grow and learn, and I did start with, I'm a new student. So I'm also an older student, and I'm learning a lot from, as my father would say, you know, wherever you are is where you're supposed to be. But also the things that you don't know, you need to surround yourself with people that do. And that's something I would think as a founder, you know, there's the passion and the being fanatical, but there's also just have to be realistic around your role and where your strengths are. And that's something that for those who are listening, it's, you know, Terry, right on, because it's very important for these maybe younger nonprofit leaders and others that are listening on this conversation, of putting in that planning now, right now, with where you see yourself, where you want to take whatever you're going to do, and how you're going to transition.
Right.
Awesome. I was going to say, for all I love how Tracey put it, there might be lots of younger folks out there looking to start or in the beginning of these stages. And one thing I want to say, particularly with being a founder, is like for me, transitioning with the organization in this way was one of the most exciting things to me that could happen. Because that means, as far as the mission, because all nonprofits are mission driven, as far as the mission goes, we will hopefully be serving more young people than ever before. We'll be able to reach more people than ever before. And that to me is super exciting. And for me, as Terry said, to leverage me in the way, because again, I wear a lot of hats. It's not my full-time gig. And I wish I could spend more time. That's just the way things go. But it's a healthy move in the organization. That's one. Two, the other thing I want to say is because there was questions like, how do we in this space like know, and how does the board know how to do these processes? Utilize your resources. Y'all, there are so many nonprofit institutions that help nonprofits specifically for these reasons. There are local universities that have nonprofit centers that can help you with these types of transitions, and that's what we did. And it's fantastic because we're all learning. Again, I started with a book, Nonprofit for Dummies. I didn't study nonprofit management or leadership in college, but there are people, experts who can help the founder, who can help the board, who can help the staff in these different areas. So you don't all, in the same way that an entrepreneur doesn't have to do it on oneself, the institution doesn't have to do it by itself either. There are many resources out there that can be utilized and help you. Some of them are even free. I would even look for those that can help you, or you can get grants that will help you pay for the services that are needed to help the organization, guide the organization to that next level.
That is an excellent point. There are lots of resources for nonprofit issues, governance, leadership, all those sorts of things. So that's an absolutely great point. We actually really don't have that much time left. I can't believe it. So I want to shift gears just a little bit, because as I said, there were lots of questions in the chat, really sort of around DEI and operationalizing it. And so I want to shift gears a little bit, but I also want to spend a little bit of time toward, before we end, to hear your thinking about our future thinking about board governance, about leadership in this space. And so one of the questions is, what advice would you give a board about diversifying its membership? And again, a lot of people were asking questions around how do you sort of operationalize DEI on the board? And my question always is, why? Why do you want to diversify your board? Do you think it's going to make your organization better, or are you checking boxes? So just kind of curious about that. And then as we wrap up, I'd like just for you to give a little snippet on sort of what you're thinking about our future focus is. So operationalizing DEI and diversifying boards, quick popcorn thoughts.
Well, I think, we're talking about diversity. And I know why we're talking about diversity, don't get me wrong, but diversity on a board can mean a lot of different things too, right? I mean, you don't want a board full of Terrys, right? As much as I may think add value, I don't think having 18 of me on the board is going to add value. So you do need diversity of thought, you need diversity of skills, you need diversity of experiences, you need diversity in a lot of different ways. And it's clear, like, depending on which studies you look at, a diverse board is definitely going to outdo a non-diverse board. I mean, that's just the way life is. I mean, diversity of thought and creates innovation. Innovation creates, a better board. So I think why do you want diversity is because you need, quite frankly, fresh air in the room from time to time, right? You need to have a different perspective come into that room from time to time. And that's what new board members, and that's what diversity brings to your board. It brings you the opportunity to hear a different perspective. And I think that sometimes you have people on the board for a very long time you don't get new perspectives. You just keep recycling, rinse, recycle, and you get the same outcomes. And you got to have, in order for things to develop and grow and flourish, you got to nurture that, and you got to nurture that by bringing in, newness to the board.
Thanks. So we have the 5-minute countdown. So I want to make sure that Tracey and Joseph get in here. So Tracey?
Yeah, I'm glad you called me because Joseph should wrap this up. He's good. So I just wanted to say, I wanted to add to what Terry said, that there's just a thought, and I couldn't find the book, but Darren Walker, who's the president, executive director, lead of the Ford Foundation, wrote a book, and I heard him speak about, he diversified a very, imagine a board of 4 and names like Carnegie and Mellon and Rockefeller and whomever, and then Darren Walker. And he was able to share, even at that level, which is, I can't remember exactly what the board was for, but it's a very high level board, that he diversified that board. He was the only person of color who was invited to this very high level board in New York, but the conversations changed and he was able to be that disruptor, as we talked about earlier. But I would encourage you, it's Darren Walker, I believe it's called Generosity of Wealth, is a book, and just to read that, just to learn about that influence. But I wanted to just add that what I see, my popcorn thought, as you were saying, for the future is that if there's, it's more so that us being in the room not only diversifies the room, that's one thing, but it elevates it to levels that if your organization is ready, it is something that particularly, I'm going to say, in the classical arts, although other boards, but in the classical arts, if you can revisit your organization and look at what you're trying to achieve in bringing us into the room, I think pretty remarkable things can happen in terms of impacting the classical canon.
Awesome. And I'll make this quick. I'll make this very quick. I like working with young people because they have a lot of ideas and they're always fresh, always. And that to bring that kind of energy to any institution, and though that mindset, to me, makes things better. I think about, as musicians, we like to get a diverse set of opinions on how we play to better ourselves and make ourselves a better player. In that same way, a diverse set of ideas coming to one organization will make that organization better. I'll end finally with the lecture that Yo-Yo Ma gave us, a Nancy Hanks lecture where he talked about the edge effect. I love talking about this, where literally you have 2 ecosystems, but where is there the most diversity, the most resilient creatures, the most resilient in the nature itself, and colorful, and is that place where those 2 ecosystems meet, and that's the edge effect, where you get the best of both worlds, literally, and that's what makes the ecosystem better. So I think with those thoughts, I think that's my promotion for diversity.
Amazing. So we have like maybe a minute left, seconds left, and I just wanted to make sure that I thanked everyone who joined us virtually. Want to thank the Sphinx organization for putting this amazing panel together. Want to thank these amazing panelists, Tracey, Terry, and Joseph. It's been amazing talking with you, thinking with you. This is a great way to spend a snowy Saturday for sure. And with that, I just want to make sure that if there are any other questions in the chat for 2 seconds, but lots of comments. People are really enjoying this conversation. I'm glad we were able to have this conversation with you. And we'll be looking out for your graduation, Tracey, for whatever you're doing next, Joseph, and for everything that Sphinx is doing and the rest of the conference. So again, thank you so much for spending this time with us, and have a great rest of the conference, great rest of your day. And we're signing off in 1 second, I think. Hi, everybody.